Get out, you gold-digging scammer. You're worthless to me now. I was heartbroken when my respected father-in-law Paul passed away after I had been caring for him. In my grief, my mother-in-law Crystal hurled cruel words at me. She only feels strong now, but that will change. I decided to reveal a truth to her. My name is Daisy. I'm a 30-year-old office worker. I lost my parents in an accident when I was young and was raised in an institution until I graduated high school. After graduation, as I was unsure about my future, it was the late Paul who offered, "Why not work at our company?" Paul owned a local construction company. I was hired as an office worker, inexperienced and unqualified, but everyone was kind and taught me everything from scratch. Now I've become a seasoned employee with over 10 years of service. My encounter with Paul was at the facility where I lived. Paul was a wonderful person who engaged in charitable work. He donated various things to my facility like bags, toys, picture books, and clothes. Having been without parents since I can remember, I naturally came to adore Paul as a real father. Paul often brought his own children. A boy my age, Alexander, and a girl 3 years younger, Mona. I especially got along well with Alexander. "Reading alone again?" I'd ask, and he would quietly nod in response. Reserved, he always read books alone. I wasn't particularly outgoing either, so we naturally spent a lot of time together. "I love foreign architecture. I'd love to visit them someday," he often said. Huh. Having no particular dreams myself, I was a bit envious of him for having one. As for his sister, she was a spoiled child, saying, "This place is boring. I want to go home. Why do I have to play with these people?" She only came a few times before stopping altogether. I found her somewhat difficult, so I was relieved. Years into my job, Paul, the company president, said something unbelievable. "Alexander, Daisy, how about you two get married?" What? We were both shocked. Alexander's of age now, and I've been looking for someone suitable, but he's shy, right? "I trust Daisy completely," he said. Honestly, I had never seen Alexander as a romantic interest. But I didn't dislike him and liked him as a person. It seemed Alexander felt the same, and so our marriage was smoothly arranged. We had a small family-only wedding. Crystal said she was embarrassed to introduce me, a woman with no relatives, as her son's wife. Having few friends ourselves, it didn't really bother us. Still, it hurt to hear Crystal say that. With no family of my own, the head of the facility I grew up in attended. Tears of joy were shed when they learned I was marrying Alexander. Amidst the blessings, there were glaring eyes. Crystal and Mona. They opposed our marriage until the end. It happened on the day I went to a family meeting. As soon as I entered, Mona said, "Make sure you clean your shoes, they're dirty." I was shocked, but Alexander defended me. Apologized to Daisy. "Like I'd listen to you," she sneered, looking down on her brother. Mona, whom I hadn't seen in a while, had grown several times wider and more intimidating. According to Alexander, she was mocked for a nasty personality and appearance, leading to her not attending school since her student days. Even as an adult, Mona has never worked. She gets an allowance from Crystal, who dotes on her, and spends her days out and about. And as for Crystal, she leaves the housework to a maid, and seems to spend her days eating out and shopping with Mona. The first time she met me, she said, "I don't know what tricks you use to worm your way in, but I don't recognize you." Although she was scolded by Paul right there, the snide comments stopped in his presence. But the bullying continued when Alexander or Paul were not around. When I got married, I moved in, and the housekeeper we had was let go. Because now we have Daisy, there's no need to pay someone else, Crystal unilaterally decided. Honestly, I was nervous about handling the chores of this large house alone, on top of my job. Sensing this, Alexander and Paul protested, but Crystal laughed, looking at Mona and said, "Mona and I are here. It'll be fine, right?" However, Crystal and Mona never helped. Instead, they criticized every little thing I did and laughed at me when I was down. They often claimed the meals I cooked as their own. There was also this incident. I went home during a work break to pick up something I'd forgotten and heard a noise inside. What? A burglar? Scared but curious, I headed towards the noise and found Crystal and Mona in my room. "What are you doing here?" I asked, and they seemed surprised too. "Don't scare us like that. Why are you here?" Crystal retorted. I thought that was my line. "I came to get something I forgot. But what are you doing in my room?" "Shut up! You talk big for just a freeloader." Mona was smirking in the background. Behind them, my closet was in disarray, and clothes, bags, and cosmetics were scattered all over the floor. In Mona's hand was a necklace I had recently bought as a treat for myself. "That's mine, isn't it?" "So what?" Unashamed, Mona said, "You bought it with the money you earned at our company, right?" "What's wrong with the boss's daughter taking it?" I tried to take it back by force, but Mona was physically stronger and I was pushed away. The two laughed at me, saying, "You look ridiculous." I was upset, but didn't want to worry Alexander or Paul, so I didn't tell them. Then, one day, Paul collapsed while at work. He was diagnosed with cancer. Already in the late stages, and given 6 months to live. Moreover, he decided not to seek treatment. "Why?" Alexander asked. "I'll decide when it's my time," Paul replied. From then on, he left the company to his son Alexander and began recuperating at home. Even with Paul at home, Crystal and Mona's attitude didn't change, and they continued to go out frequently. "What a troublesome pair," Paul said. Crystal wasn't always like this. When the company was starting and money was tight, she was very devoted. But as work got busier and she was left alone with the kids, she began spending money as if to distract from her loneliness. Eventually, she started dipping into the company's funds, so Paul had to expel her from the company, giving her a fixed living allowance instead. Regarding Mona, once during her teenage years, he scolded her for not going to school, and she snapped, "Don't act like a father." Since then, he hadn't known how to approach her. Listening to Paul's sporadic stories, I realized that they too had their issues. But that didn't make me feel any more forgiving for their past behavior. Eventually, Paul's condition worsened. When he became bedridden, Crystal said, within earshot, "Good thing he has a hefty life insurance." She didn't care for her suffering husband and continued her days out with Mona. Seeing this, we felt it unfair to Paul, but he assured us, "Don't worry about anything. I've got it all figured out." His eyes were filled with determination. A few days later, Alexander and I were called by Paul. He told us something important. Initially surprised and conflicted, Alexander and I discussed and made a decision. While talking, it felt like returning to our childhood days for the first time in ages. Months later, Paul passed away. It was about a year after his cancer diagnosis, despite being given only 6 months to live. Just before his death, we tried to contact Crystal and Mona, but couldn't reach them. They finally appeared at the hospital 5 hours after Paul had passed away. "What were you doing?" Alexander demanded, but they didn't answer. Realizing it looked bad, they pretended to be sad, but without a single tear. I thought they were incredibly awful people. Then, after the wake and funeral with only family, Crystal suddenly said, "Now, let's talk about the future. So could you leave now? I was stunned and speechless. Did you think I didn't know you were after the fortune? Disgusting. I never did such a thing. Why would you say something so cruel? Just get out, you gold-digging scammer. Now that my husband is gone, you're useless. That's when Alexander spoke up. Enough, Daisy. Let's leave this house quickly. Yeah, I don't want to see the faces of such filthy-hearted people anymore. To this, Mona sneered. How cheeky. Hey, I'm thirsty. Make me a coffee, Daisy. And me too. Do something wife-like for once before you leave, will you? How about some coffee? Crystal mocked. To which I replied, why should I make coffee? I'm no longer Alexander's wife. They looked confused. We're already divorced. Indeed, we had already divorced. There was no affair, no wrongdoing. It was just that our marriage, started due to Paul, never felt right. We had grown up more like siblings and couldn't see each other as husband and wife. Of course we had told Paul about this. If that's what you two have decided, I won't object, he had said. The reason I stayed in this house even after the divorce was because I wanted to. I wanted to see the last moments of Paul, who had taken care of me. Unaware of this, Crystal said, Well, now we can kick her out without any reservations. Please leave quickly. Mona joined in. Get out! Get out! I'll gladly leave. Now that Paul is gone, I have no reason to stay here, I said. I'm leaving too, Alexander added. I've no attachment to this house now that Dad's gone. They seemed surprised, but then Crystal said, Lucky us, even the bothersome Alexander is leaving. Let's hire a maid again. Yes, with all the insurance money and inheritance, we can play for a lifetime. Crystal and Mona happily chatted. Facing Alexander, Oh, and don't forget the lawyer's meeting next week for the will reading. Oh, Daisy, you don't need to come. You're a stranger after all, Crystal laughed. I know. Make sure you two pack your things, Alexander said, leaving the house with me. Huh? They looked puzzled for a moment, but seemed too preoccupied with money to care. A week later, on the day of the will reading, Crystal and Mona were shocked by the person who appeared with the family lawyer. Everyone is here, so let's proceed with reading the late president's will. Wait, why are you here? Crystal suddenly yelled. It wasn't surprising, as I, who shouldn't have been there, was present. A stranger like you has no right to be here. Leave now, Crystal demanded of me. Today, Daisy's presence here is per the deceased president's wishes. We will not entertain any objections. This lawyer had been handling our company's affairs for many years. He was well aware of Crystal and Mona's behavior, glaring at them with disgust as he spoke. Well, fine. Let her be here. It'll be fun to see her suffer up close. Yeah, let's get this started. Despite their own interruptions, I couldn't fathom what they were thinking. They looked at me with detestable expressions. Now I'll read it. As the lawyer read the will, Crystal and Mona's initial laughter turned into an ashen pallor. After he finished, This is ridiculous! It's fake! She must have switched it. Crystal was almost ready to lunge at me. The lawyer clarified, There is no mistake. I personally drafted this will and have kept it in my custody. That's absurd! It's a lie! It's a lie! Crystal collapsed crying. And no wonder. The contents of the will were completely different from what they had imagined. The contents of the will were as follows. It stated that Crystal, Alexander, and Mona would each inherit a portion of the estate. However, the amounts were far less than they expected. $10,000 for Crystal, and $5,000 each for Alexander and Mona. Only they were surprised by this amount. We already knew about it. Even I was shocked by how small the amount was. Before his death, Paul had made a request to me and Alexander. I won't be around much longer. I don't intend to leave those two any money. They've never worked properly. They need to learn the value of money. He had said to leave them just enough money for a few months until they found jobs and to donate the rest. Given their past extravagant spending, this seemed a fair amount. Mona exclaimed, "Work? That's impossible for me. I can't work. Wait, we can sell this house." "Yeah, let's do that. It might be smaller, but there's a nice new apartment nearby." They rejoiced until I interjected. "That's a nice thought, but it's not possible." In truth, this house, including the land, had already been sold to one of Paul's acquaintances. After Paul's death, the house was to be demolished for an apartment building. Out of respect for Paul, the acquaintance had waited until his passing. Now, Crystal and Mona had to leave as soon as possible. "By the way, have you finished packing?" They were in a state of panic. Suddenly remembering something, Crystal boasted. "Right, there's the insurance money. I'll graciously let you have the small change Paul left." To which was replied, "Unfortunately, Daisy is the beneficiary, not Crystal. You won't receive a cent." "Huh?" They both looked at me in disbelief. "What do you mean? You're a fraud, a thief. Don't mess with us," Crystal exclaimed. "A thief? Are you referring to your daughter who steals my belongings?" "That's not theft. It's mine since I bought it with my company's money," she retorted illogically. I was genuinely surprised when Paul wanted me as the insurance beneficiary. He believes I would use it in the best way possible, rather than Crystal. Alexander agreed with this decision. I had already planned how to use the money. Tired of their commotion, I said, "Well, our discussion is over, so I'll be leaving." A few days later, Crystal and Mona suddenly showed up at my office. "What do you want?" I asked. "We've come to ask you for a favor today." It was the first time I'd seen Crystal so subdued. Honestly, it was unsettling. "I'll hear you out, but what is it?" "We need you to lend us money. $30,000. You got the insurance money, so it's a small amount for you, right?" Earning $30,000 is harder than these people realize. As I thought this, I asked, "What do you need it for?" "Actually, my mother is sick and needs surgery. It costs $30,000. "I'm so worried about Grandma." Mona was pretending to cry next to her. I couldn't help but laugh at them. "What's so funny?" Crystal demanded. "Your grandmother passed away a long time ago, Crystal. Have you lost your mind?" They looked caught, but I continued. "Nightclubs are that expensive, huh? How much did you party?" "How do you know that? You're such a horrible woman," Mona exclaimed, but I knew everything. It started when Paul fell ill. A young man visited our home when Paul was alone, claiming to be from a nightclub. He said Crystal and Mona were frequent visitors. Initially, they spent modest amounts, but recently their spending had increased. They often left without paying after drinking too much, and that's why he came looking for them. At the club, they bragged, "We'll soon come into a lot of money." Hearing this, Paul was furious, and decided then about the inheritance and insurance money. "The company, you two decide," Paul had told Alexander and me. "We'll have to ask Alexander to pay. He's the president after all," Mona suggested. "Alexander? He's not here. He's abroad." "What?" "And I'm the president." They were shocked. When Paul said we could do what we wanted with the company, Alexander told me about his childhood dream to travel and see foreign buildings. I supported him. While discussing, I realized my dream was to develop the company further. I love this company. My dream is to make it even more successful. Could you please leave now? If you come back, I'll call security. They left, faces red and looking defeated. As for what happened to them, without a plan, they quickly spent Paul's small inheritance. Unable to pay the nightclub, they were chased by debt. Once, I saw them working at a notorious supermarket known for bullying newcomers. Their appearance had deteriorated, looking older and worn out. They seemed to be struggling, but it was the result of their actions. As for me, I'm working hard every day, collaborating with my colleagues. I'm now known as a successful businesswoman, and have been appearing more in the media. Regarding Paul's insurance money, I donated it all to the facility. I thought Paul would be happy with that decision. I recently received a postcard from Alexander abroad with a picture of him smiling happily. Though he faces challenges in a foreign country, he seems to enjoy every day. We may be divorced, but now we're good friends. I'm having the best time of my life.